Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on the Administrative Order. In this section, dear friends, we will be exploring the divine institutions. The spiritual assemblies are divine institutions created by Baha'u'llah. Upon those who serve on them, he has bestowed an inestimable bounty, enabling them to take part in the erection of the framework of his world order, now in its embryonic form. Great as this privilege is, members of these institutions are faced with staggering responsibilities, for they can either by means of applying the spiritual principles enshrined in the administrative order establish strong and healthy assemblies, firmly grounded and harmoniously functioning, or alternatively, degenerate into a mere body without spirit, well organized yet full of tension, problems, frictions, and misunderstandings. The Baha'is in the early days, those who lived and labored in the heroic age, did not have these responsibilities or problems. Having come in direct contact with the supreme manifestation of God and the center of his covenant, they had become a new creation endowed with divine qualities, utterly oblivious of themselves and wholly attracted to Baha'u'llah, intoxicated by the wine of his utterances and completely devoted to him. These holy souls, like plants in the spring season, were refreshed by the vernal showers of his revelation. They drew their strength and sustenance directly and independently from the center of the cause. These early believers had direct communication with Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, and a great many of the tablets we have today were revealed in answer to their letters seeking guidance or asking various questions. In that age, there were no grounds for ill feeling or misunderstanding, tension or friction among the believers, for they had no community life. It was then that the cause produced its spiritual giants. However, in the formative age, the followers of Baha'u'llah must work together in Baha'i communities. The vernal showers of Baha'u'llah's revelation have ceased, and the spirit of the cause of God, that water of life, which animated a band of God intoxicated heroes in an earlier age, can today reach and refresh the believers only through the institutions of a divinely ordained order. The beloved guardian who laid the foundations of this order, and whose spirit will undoubtedly dominate the entire period of the formative age of the faith, in speaking of the birth of the administrative order, has summarized this process in these words. The moment had now arrived for that undying, that world vitalizing spirit that was born in Shiraz, that had been rekindled in Tehran, that had been fanned into flame in Baghdad and Adrianople, that had been carried to the west, and was now illuminating the fringes of 5 continents to incarnate itself in institutions designed to canalize its outspreading energies and stimulate its growth. The spiritual assemblies, the chief sinews of Baha'i society, which in the future will evolve into national and local houses of justice, are indeed channels through which the life giving spirit of the faith flows. The spiritual assembly is not merely a meeting of 9 members, it is rather a divine institution in which man becomes an instrument for the flow of the Spirit. Members of the spiritual assemblies often come from backgrounds which are socially, intellectually, and spiritually different. Young and old, rich and poor, literate and illiterate, veteran and newly enrolled, all may sit together as members of a spiritual assembly. This diversity of thought, of culture, of customs, and background, which could give rise to such incompatibility as would cripple the working of an organization in the outside world, becomes the source of strength and blessing in the spiritual assembly, whose members, far from dwelling on their differences in education, capacity, and ability, can work together in accordance with the spirit of Baha'u'llah's administrative order to create a loving and harmonious body pulsating with the spirit of the cause and demonstrating thereby the dynamism of its cohesive power. Dear friends, using the previous analogy, in which spiritual assemblies are likened to channels carrying the water of life, each member could be compared to one of the bricks which compose that channel. Let us build a channel with 9 bricks, each different in size and shape, and then examine the strains and stresses within it as the water passes through. Should the 9 stones be cemented together in such a way that their smooth sides are placed inside the channel, then the water can flow through smoothly. But if some stones stand out in the way of the stream, the result will be turbulence. Every brick will be subjected to great pressures, so that in the end the channel may be destroyed. Similarly, if the members of a spiritual assembly meet together in a spirit of harmony and unity, eliminate their selfish desires, leave behind their egos, and are, through their love for Baha'u'llah, merged and fused into one body, then this assembly becomes spiritual. It will attract the bounties of Baha'u'llah, and through it, the spirit and power of the teachings will flow to mankind. But should members bring with them their sense of superiority and pride in their own accomplishments, and thereby raise their egos so that they protrude like the stones in the channel, then that assembly, in the words of Abdul Baha, will be brought to naught. The assembly will become the center of turbulence, and the channel bearing the spirit of the cause may be completely clogged. There will be a period of intense pain, of suffering, and tension in the assembly. Those who suffer most are often the very people who have raised their egos. The mighty forces of the faith flowing through the institution will exert great pressure on these obstacles, and in the same way that the stones which protrude into the channel are hit by the stream and are eventually washed away. So the administrator order does not harbor vain and egotistical personalities. It calls for humility and self effacement, for servitude and detachment. The standard it demands from every member of the assembly is epitomized by the following words of the Master, where he exhorts the believers to tread the path of humility and servitude. Make me as dust in the pathway of thy loved ones. Baha'u'llah, in many of his tablets, has extolled humility and servitude as the greatest station destined for man. Not until the individual acquire these virtues can his deed, however meritorious, become acceptable to God. Dear friends, let us consider, for instance, what the most acceptable gift is which one can give to a friend. It will be an article which he does not already possess. Then what is it that man can offer to God which will be acceptable to him? God possesses everything. Man's accomplishments, his knowledge, his virtue, his wealth and power, if offered to God at the end of a lifetime, are as utter nothingness when compared with God's transcendent glory. Yet, by virtue of his sovereignty and dominion, humility is not one of his attributes, and therefore this is the most acceptable gift of man in his sight. Humility and servitude before the believers are the two essential qualities for members of spiritual assemblies. Without them, the spirit of love and unity, which must exist at the time of consultation, will be destroyed, and the assembly will not be able to function in accordance with the spirit of the administrative order. Other harmful elements which may be introduced into the nascent institutions of the faith are the evil influences of the old order, which has been breaking up ever since Baha'u'llah's summons to the kings and rulers went unheeded. The bearers of these harmful influences are the believers who have to live and work in the outside world, a world encircled by the gloom of unbelief and godlessness, spiritually famished, full of corruption, prejudice, and strife, with its false standards and its hollow and outworn institutions, functioning for the most part within a framework based on intrigues, deceptions, and discord. The believers, however sincere, can unwittingly bring with them into the assembly, if they are not ever watchful, some of the standards and practices of the old order, so alien to the spirit of the faith and its divinely ordained institutions. Dear friends, let us consider the analogy of the channel made up of 9 bricks. Though pure water flows within it, the channel itself is surrounded by and buried within the earth. Should any one of those bricks be made of porous material, it will allow some of the impurities from the outside to pass into the channel, and the water will become contaminated with soil and dirt. But if the bricks are strong, solid, and impregnable, Nothing from the outside can seep through, and the water within the channel will remain pure and unpolluted. This is true of the members of the spiritual assembly. The strength of the individual member, his solidarity and firmness, is dependent upon his faith in Baha'u'llah and obedience to his commandments. A lukewarm and faint hearted believer whose faith in Baha'u'llah is not wholehearted is likely to become influenced by those loose standards, the decadent theories, and the corrupt practices of a rapidly declining order, and become the means of introducing some of its unwholesome elements into the nascent institutions of Baha'u'llah's world embracing faith. Dear friends, the faith of Baha'u'llah stands far above the fears, doubts, and perplexities of the old and outworn institutions and obsolescent doctrines, whether social, political, or religious, and is in no way influenced by the man made, the hollow, and the godless philosophies and theories which have been promulgated in modern times, and which have miserably failed to produce an acceptable solution for the problems facing mankind. Those members of the assembly, however, who have recognized the station of Baha'u'llah and are steadfast in his covenant, are safe from the poisonous influences of the old order. Through their staunch faith in Baha'u'llah, their undeviating loyalty to Abdul Baha, the beloved guardian and the universal house of justice, their rectitude of conduct, their unfailing adherence to the laws, teachings, and ordinances of Baha'u'llah, these members are armed against and protected from the evil influences which exert pressure upon the newly born divine institutions. In the channel of the administrative order, these souls are indeed as solid and impregnable stones. Faith is a relative term, and its intensity varies from person to person. When the individual recognizes for the first time the truth of Baha'u'llah's mission, the spark of faith is ignited in his heart. This spark will grow into a mighty flame if he allows himself to fall in love with Baha'u'llah, to serve his cause, and to be immersed in the ocean of his words. Only in this way will the heart receive an ever increasing measure of confirmation and assurance. No story of the early believers is more moving than that of the martyrs of the faith who fearlessly and with great heroism arose in the propagation of the cause of God, and who remained steadfast until in the end they testified with their life blood to the truth of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. These souls had attained the highest degree of faith and were the embodiments of certitude and assurance. A story of great inspiration recorded in the annals of the faith is that of Ruhullah Varqa, a teenage martyr of the faith, a hero and indeed a spiritual prodigy. It was he who, at the age of 8, attained the presence of Baha'u'llah in Akka, and through his love for the Blessed Beauty, demonstrated such maturity and understanding that the believers were inspired and uplifted by him and felt the greatness of his soul. His devotion to the cause and enthusiasm for its propagation carried him soon after attaining the presence of his Lord to the prison of Tehran, where he shared with his illustrious father, the outstanding poet and teacher of the faith, Ali Muhammad, an apostle of Baha'u'llah surnamed Varqa, by the pen of the Most High, the ordeals and sufferings of prison life. It was in that prison that he witnessed with his own eyes the body of his beloved father fall by the executioner's dagger. He, a short time later, refusing to recant his faith and wishing to join his father, was strangled to death at the age of 12. Abdul Baha and the greatest holy leaf had a great admiration and love for Ruhullah, and both used to enjoy talking to him when he was in Akka. A story told about him is that one day Abdul Baha asked Ruhullah how he spent his time at home. He replied, "We teach the faith to people and tell them of the coming of the Promised One." The master, obviously enjoying talking to this wonderful youth and wishing to try him, asked what he would do if it were found that the Bab was not the true Promised One, and that the real Prophet had appeared. "I shall teach him the faith," was his prompt reply. This is an example of true faith, of absolute certitude and steadfastness in the covenant. Though the heroic age has ended, the believers in the formative age are tested in different ways. One such testing ground is at the meeting of the spiritual assembly, where the individual member will be tested in thought, word, and deed, and where his qualities and potential will become known. The best protection for the believer is steadfastness in the covenant, which, in simple language, means obedience to Baha'u'llah, and after him to Abdul Baha, Shoghi Effendi, and today the Universal House of Justice. This is a matter of faith, and every Baha'i who has recognized Baha'u'llah as the supreme manifestation of God will already have accepted this cardinal principle of the cause. There are many teachings or principles in the faith which a person may agree with. The faith of a believer is tested, however, when he comes across a statement which is contrary to his way of thinking. In this instance, it may be said that the degree of steadfastness in the covenant is determined by the ready manner in which one acknowledges, sincerely and from the heart, that Baha'u'llah and those upon whom he has conferred infallibility are divinely guided, that their words, their teachings, and their guidance are free from error, and that the mind of man is finite and his judgment often erroneous. A great responsibility which falls on the shoulders of those who are called upon to serve on spiritual assemblies is to ensure that the administrative principles revealed by the pen of Baha'u'llah, elaborated by Abdul Baha, and explained in detail by the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi, are faithfully applied in the working of these institutions. An important instance of these principles is on the occasion of consultation in the spiritual assembly. The standards which, according To Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, the members of the spiritual assemblies must uphold during their consultations are very high indeed. The prime requisites for them that take counsel together, writes Abdul Baha, are purity of motive, radiance of spirit, detachment from all else save God, attraction to his divine fragrance, humility and lowliness amongst his loved ones, patience and long suffering in difficulties, and servitude to his exalted threshold. The first condition is absolute love and harmony amongst the members of the assembly. They must be wholly free from estrangement and must manifest in themselves the unity of God, for they are the waves of one sea, the drops of one river, the stars of one heaven, the rays of one sun, the trees of one orchard, the flowers of one garden. It is the application of these spiritual standards which makes Baha'i consultation a testing ground for every member of the assembly. All the virtues of the individual, his faith, his courage, and his steadfastness in the covenant, undergo a rigorous test as the assembly sits around the table to consult. Here, the spiritual battle within the soul of the individual begins and will continue as long as the ego is the dictator. Indeed, in many cases, this battle may last a lifetime. In this battlefield, the forces of light and darkness are arrayed against each other. On the one side stands the spiritual entity, the soul of the believer. On the other, a great enemy, the self or ego. The spiritual standard is carried aloft by the Master, and should the individual turn his heart to the realm of glory, he can unmistakably hear with the ears of the Spirit at every assembly meeting the vibrant choice of the Master summoning him to purity of motive, radiance of spirit, detachment, attraction to divine fragrance, humility amongst his loved ones, patience and long suffering in difficulties, servitude, love, harmony, devotion, courtesy, dignity, care, moderation, freedom from estrangement. These and many more such attributes are the prime requisites of Baha'i consultation. Whenever the soul hearkens to these lofty standards set by Abdul Baha, and when the occasion demands, applies them during consultation, the ego, defeated, will recede into the background. The soul emerges victorious in this battle and will become radiant with the light of faith and detachment. The application of these spiritual principles, however, must be genuine and not merely superficial. The feelings of love, unity, detachment, and harmony must come from the heart. They must not be manifested in an outward form only. Humility and servitude, radiance and devotion, courtesy and patience, along with all the other virtues, are qualities of the Spirit. These cannot be manifested by paying lip service to them. If this is the case, then the ego is victor. It may not be easy for anyone to attain to such lofty standards during Baha'i consultation. No matter how sincere and devoted, man often fails to apply these principles at assembly meetings. But within this spiritual assembly, there is a mighty force, often overlooked, which is capable of transforming human failures and shortcomings into noble aspirations and praiseworthy actions. It can change the atmosphere of the spiritual assembly from one of tension and discord into one of love and unity. Freed from the entanglement of argument and controversy, the assembly can then become a perfect channel for the outpouring of the spirit of the cause to mankind. This potent force is the presence of Baha'u'llah in that assembly. In the Kitab Ahdas, he has stated that when the members assemble in the council chamber, they should regard themselves as being in the presence of God, which is indeed in the presence of Baha'u'llah. This presence is real and not imaginary, for he calls on them not only to consider themselves in his presence, but to see him who cannot be seen. In this life, things which are real are often not seen with the human eye. This contingent world and all that can be seen within it is but a shadow. The world of reality is spiritual, and for its comprehension, man needs spiritual qualities. The presence of Baha'u'llah in the spiritual assembly is more real than anything else within that body. And as the members assemble, they are indeed seated in his presence, as he himself has affirmed. When the members of the assembly become truly conscious of this, and with the eye of the Spirit see Baha'u'llah in their midst, they will be immersed in the ocean of humility and self effacement, will be filled with a new spirit, and will become radiant. The presence of Baha'u'llah will fuse the nine members into one body, and they will no longer dwell on the faults and shortcomings of one another. Every word that a member utters, every idea that he puts forward, every contribution that he makes during consultation will, in reality, be addressed to Baha'u'llah in a spirit of humility and servitude. Within such an atmosphere, Baha'i consultation becomes truly constructive, for every member cannot help but offer his ideas frankly and cordially. The inhibitions which could often, for various reasons, such as the possibility of his becoming unpopular within the community or of offending other members of the assembly, prevent one member from expressing his views, will disappear and be replaced by courage and wisdom. Indeed, in this instance, when the individual turns to Baha'u'llah with a pure motive, the words he utters will produce such an effect on his hearers that no one will be offended. The consciousness of the presence of Baha'u'llah in the assembly will create a spiritual atmosphere. Souls will become humble. Any feelings of superiority will vanish, and the ego will be swept aside. For in the presence of Baha'u'llah, who could consider himself superior to his fellow members? Who could belittle the opinion of another, whether outwardly or in his heart? Who would lose his temper, raise his voice, interrupt or argue with his friend in the assembly, or who would adopt an attitude or speak in a way that could offend another soul? A spiritual assembly which functions in this way is in truth appointed of God. O ye who are firm in the covenant, are the assuring words with which the Master addresses the members of spiritual assemblies. Abdul Baha is constantly engaged in ideal communication with any spiritual assembly which is instituted through the divine bounty, and the members of which are in the utmost devotion turning to the divine kingdom and are firm in the covenant. To them he is heartily attached, and with them he is united by everlasting ties. Dear friends, Baha'i consultation, which is carried out in accordance with the spirit of the administrative order, is a creative process whereby different opinions and ideas develop into a well balanced and mature decision. The members of the assembly have first to familiarize themselves with the facts relating to the subject under consideration, and then, in a prayerful attitude, express their views and opinions frankly and candidly. In this cause, Abdul Baha states, consultation is of vital importance, but spiritual conference, and not mere voicing of personal views, is intended. The purpose is to emphasize the statement that consultation must have for its object the investigation of truth. Man should weigh his opinions with the utmost sincerity, calmness, and composure. Before expressing his own views, he should carefully consider the views already advanced by others. If he finds that a previously expressed opinion is more true and worthy, he should accept it immediately and not willfully hold to an opinion of his own. Therefore, true consultation is spiritual conference in the attitude and atmosphere of love. Members must love each other in the spirit of fellowship in order that good results be forthcoming. Love and fellowship are the foundation. Often, an idea put forward by one member stimulates other ideas, and these flow from one to another until they become crystallized in the form of a resolution, which is the child of Baha'i consultation and is unanimously carried. In other cases, when a resolution is carried by a majority decision, it is no less valid and all members support it wholeheartedly for the simple reason that Abdul Baha has enjoined on the believers to do so. This is one of the spiritual principles which govern the workings of the administrative order. If this support is not given from the heart, then the individual has not acted in accordance with the spirit of the faith. No member of an assembly who has been true to the tenets of the faith and has progressed spiritually would harbor in his mind the thought of giving himself any credit for his suggestions or ideas, no matter how meritorious these might have been. To be opinionated, dogmatic, stubborn, and argumentative in Baha'i consultation is to oppose the very spirit of the faith. The practices of dictation of ideas, of lobbying and persuasion, so often employed within the institutions of the old order, are contrary to the teachings of Baha'u'llah. In their eagerness to solve a problem to the satisfaction of all, or their anxiety not to offend the feelings of particular individuals or the community as a whole, members of a spiritual assembly may sometimes unconsciously or even instinctively reach a decision based on compromising a basic principle. This is another harmful influence of the old order, which can undoubtedly damage the working of the spiritual assembly. Whereas the non Baha'i institutions, whether social, political, or religious, often turn to compromise as an effective instrument for the solution of their problems. The embryonic institutions of the New World Order draw their strength and vigor from the truth of the Word of God revealed by His Holiness Baha'u'llah. The laws, the principles, and the teachings which 40 years of continuous revelation has vouchsafed to humanity and which must govern the workings of these institutions for a period of no less than 1,000 years are all clear and explicit and subject to no alteration or compromise. In addition, during 29 years of his ministry, Abdul Baha has disclosed the inner spirit of these teachings and elucidated their meaning. This was followed by 36 years of guardianship, during which the beloved guardian Shogh Effendi, through his communications with individuals as well as assemblies, not only amplified the interpretations of Abdul Baha, but also applied most of these laws and principles to specific cases. Though members of spiritual assemblies are free to exercise their right of self expression and to take their own initiative during the assembly's deliberations, and though they have plenty of scope to consult and reach decisions on matters which fall within their jurisdiction, they are, nevertheless, obliged to follow the guidance of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, Shogh Effendi, and the Universal House of Justice, and to apply this to their own particular circumstances without any compromise. Indeed, this vast ocean of divine guidance will give clear orientation to Baha'i consultation at every assembly meeting, enabling the members to avoid many pitfalls and to reach decisions which are in accordance with the spirit of the faith. One of the unique features of the faith is that His Holiness Baha'u'llah has revealed a new range of teachings which are unprecedented in the older dispensations and are designed to regulate the functioning of the administrative institutions of his cause. During the entire period of the prophetic cycle, beginning with Adam and ending with Muhammad, and even during the Baha'i dispensation, the scope and the application of spiritual teachings remained almost the same. The Sermon on the Mount, epitomizing the spiritual and moral teachings of Christianity, might be regarded as the basic pattern and essence of spiritual teachings in all other religions. These spiritual teachings have exerted a deep and ever abiding influence on man's life and actions. Neither the passage of time nor even the fact that the former religions are no longer able to cope with the problems of this age have been effective in erasing from the hearts of men some eternal spiritual teachings with which they were brought up, and which have been so ingrained in their minds and souls as to become almost second nature to them. So profound has been this influence that even among those who have become disillusioned, lost their faith, and joined the ranks of agnostics and atheists, many are found who are driven by their consciences to practice these humanitarian and spiritual principles as a way of life. Never before, until the advent of the Baha'i dispensation, did a manifestation of God and the center of his covenant so widen the range of these spiritual teachings as to include a series of administrative principles designed to govern the workings of the institutions of his new world order. The spiritual and administrative principles have been placed on a par with each other and are accorded equal importance. Therefore, in this age, not only must the believer follow the basic spiritual teachings of love, honesty, forgiveness, and all other divine commandments, which are primarily intended for one individual in his relationship with another, but he must also observe those principles which define his role within Baha'i society and which determine his conduct in relation to its institutions. The strength and effectiveness of the institutions of the embryonic world order of Baha'u'llah are not due only to their divine origin and to the spirit of the faith which flows through them, but also to the fact that the believers observe the administrative principles as an act of faith, that they obey wholeheartedly the commandments of Baha'u'llah in relation to these institutions, and that in the performance of their administrative duties, they vigilantly guard against introduction into the administrative order of any unwholesome element which would tend to hamper its growth, sap its strength, or debase its station. To enumerate a few administrative principles, let us first consider the election of the spiritual assembly. Although an administrative function, the election of the spiritual assembly has a great spiritual significance and is to be carried out in a spirit of prayer and devotion. The Guardian has indicated the qualifications of the members of an assembly. The elector, when voting for them, should consider with the least trace of passion and prejudice, and irrespective of any material consideration, the names of only those who can best combine the necessary qualities of unquestioned loyalty, of selfless devotion, of a well trained mind, of recognized ability, and mature experience. In Baha'i elections, there is to be no electioneering, canvassing, or propaganda. Such practices are against the spirit of the cause of Baha'u'llah and are clearly forbidden. The electors have freedom of choice, and the election is by secret ballot. It is improper for two people, even a husband and a wife, to consult together or to influence each other in their choice. These administrative principles are sacred to a Baha'i, and to break any of them is tantamount to breaking a spiritual principle. Another important administrative principle is to accept the decisions of the spiritual assembly. Even these decisions prove to be wrong. The spiritual assemblies are not infallible bodies, but if the members of the assembly, regardless of their personal views, support the decision wholeheartedly, the truth will be manifested, and the assembly will be led to correct its previous decision, failing which, The pattern of the administrative order is such that a wrong decision can be righted. For the local assemblies are linked to their national assemblies, and these in turn to the universal house of justice. The National Assembly, by virtue of its wider jurisdiction and authority over the local assemblies within its province, is in a better position to draw the attention of the local assembly to a resolution which it considers to be wrong and to ask that body to reconsider its decision. If need be, the Universal House of Justice may, in the end, give its final and infallible verdict on the subject. The authority with which Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and the beloved guardian Shoaib Effendi have invested both local and national assemblies is clear and unquestionable. It is enjoined upon the believers to obey the decisions of their assembly. To disobey them on the grounds that their decision might be wrong is not permitted. The beloved guardian Shoaib Effendi has clearly stated the authority of the National Assembly in these words: I wish to reaffirm in clear and categorical language the principle already enunciated upholding the supreme authority of the National Assembly in all matters that affect the interest of the faith. There can be no conflict of authority, no duality under any form or circumstances in any sphere of Baha'i jurisdiction, whether local, national, or international. The National Assembly, however, although the sole interpreter of its declaration of trust and bylaws, is directly and morally responsible if it allows any body or institution within its jurisdiction to abuse its privileges or to decline in the exercise of its rights and privileges. It is the trusted guardian and the mainspring of the manifold activities and interests of every national community in the Baha'i world. It constitutes the sole link that binds these communities to the International House of Justice, the supreme administrative body in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Although the spiritual assembly has been given authority to deal with matters which fall within its jurisdiction and is empowered to enforce its decisions whenever the situation demands it, and despite the fact that its members are not answerable for their actions to those who have elected them, notwithstanding this, the assembly is not an institution whose members act with dictatorial powers. On the contrary, every matter which comes up at the assembly meeting is to be dealt with in a spirit of loving consultation, care, and justice. The beloved guardian has described the attitude and responsibility of the members of the spiritual assembly in these words: their function is not to dictate, but to consult, not only among themselves, but as much as possible with the friends whom they represent. They must regard themselves in no other light but that of chosen instruments for a more efficient and dignified presentation of the cause of God. They should never be led to suppose that they are the central ornaments of the body of the cause, intrinsically superior to others in capacity or merit, and sole promoters of its teachings and principles. They should approach their task with extreme humility and endeavor, by their open mindedness, their high sense of justice and duty, their candor, their modesty, their entire devotion to the welfare and interests of their friends, the cause and humanity, to win not only the confidence and the genuine support and respect of those whom they serve, but also their esteem and real affection. They must at all times avoid the spirit of exclusiveness, the atmosphere of secrecy, free themselves from a domineering attitude, and banish all forms of prejudice and passion from their deliberations. They should, within the limits of wise discretion, take the friends into their confidence, acquaint them with their plans, share with them their problems and anxieties, and seek their advice and counsel. And when they are called upon to arrive at a certain decision, they should, after dispassionate, anxious, and cordial consultation, turn to God in prayer and with earnestness and conviction and courage record their vote and abide by the voice of the majority, which we are told by our Master to be the voice of truth, never to be challenged, and always to be wholeheartedly enforced. To this voice the friends must heartily respond, and regard it as the only means that can ensure the protection and advancement of the cause. Whereas it is easy to accept and obey a decision with which one agrees, it is not always easy to do so when one does not agree and considers the decision to be wrong, especially if it relates to a problem in which one is personally involved. This is one of the tests which confront the believers in this age, and is, in effect, a spiritual battle which many individuals have to fight in order to acquire spiritual qualities, to draw nearer to Baha'u'llah, and to become detached from earthly things. It is often attachment to this world which clouds the vision and makes the individual proud, arrogant, and self centered. Obedience to Baha'u'llah, humility, and submissiveness towards the institutions will, in the end, confer inestimable blessings upon the soul. Attachment to this world is often mistakenly understood to be the possession of earthly goods. Should a man, Baha'u'llah explains to his followers, wish to adorn himself with the ornaments of the earth, to wear its apparels, or partake of the benefits it can bestow, no harm can befall him if he alloweth nothing whatever to intervene between him and God. For God hath ordained every good thing, whether created in the heavens or in the earth, for such of his servants as truly believe in him. Dear friends, there is a story in Persian which throws some light on the nature and meaning of detachment from this world. It is the story of a king and a dervish. The king had many spiritual qualities, but in his heart he envied the dervish, who seemed to have no attachment to this world. For all that a dervish possessed was a basket in which he carried his food. He spent his time roaming around town chanting the praises of his Lord and having a mystical communion with him. He had no home and no belongings yet, and yet he considered himself to be so rich that he owned the whole world. To this way, the life the king was attracted, so he invited a dervish to his palace in order to learn some lessons in detachment. The dervish came and stayed for some time. At last, the king decided to give up his throne and live the life of a dervish. Putting on some old clothes, he disguised himself as a poor man and left his palace with his guest. They had walked together some distance when the dervish realized that he had left his basket behind in the palace. He explained to the king that he could not go without the basket, and that they had better go back and fetch it. It was by this accident and incident that the dervish was finally tested and found to be attached to this world. The king had left behind his palaces, his treasures, and was treading the path of detachment, whereas the dervish preaching this very virtue for a lifetime proved in the end to be attached to his small basket. Attachment is an attitude of mind and is not necessarily related to riches. The pride which the individual may have in his learning and knowledge, his accomplishments in this life, his possession in the community, his position in the community, his fame and popularity, the love of his own self and of his possessions could all become barriers between his soul and God. Dear friends, another principle which plays an important role in the proper functioning of the spiritual assembly is the unity of its members. Unity should not be taken as uniformity or having the same views and ideas during consultation. On the contrary, as Abdul Baha has explained, the shining spark of truth cometh forth only after the clash of differing opinions. By unity is meant a spiritual tie which binds the members together and which derives its cohesive force from Baha'u'llah. The key to achieving this unity is to love the other members with the love of God and not for their own sakes, and to look at their perfections, not their shortcomings. To prefer oneself above other members and to belittle their opinions, no matter how immature or inadequate these might be, is against the spirit of the teachings of Baha'u'llah and is indicative of immaturity and egotism on the part of the individual concerned. When the heart of man is deprived of faith and belief in God, the individual tends to be motivated by his animal nature. It is then that, instead of looking upon his fellow man with the eye of compassion, he views him with the eye of justice, finds many faults in him, and passes judgment upon him. On the other hand, the institutions of the old order, whose main function is supposed to be the maintenance of law and order and peace within society, incline more and more towards leniency, forgiveness, and compassion instead of firmness, justice, and equity. The faith of Baha'u'llah, through the dynamic influence it exerts on the hearts of men, aims to reverse this pattern within human society. It teaches that it is not for an individual to judge his fellow man or to look upon him with the eye of criticism. It clearly asserts that the relationship of one individual with another is based on love and compassion, and that to forgive and to have a sin covering eye is a praiseworthy virtue as far as the individual is concerned. It proclaims, however, that the basis upon which the spiritual assemblies, the institutions which, in the fullness of time, will evolve into houses of justice, are established is not forgiveness, but justice. The following is an extract from a letter written by the guardian through his secretary. He, like the master before him, is so anxious to see the believers united in serving the faith. If between the friends true love based rapidly on the love of God could become manifest, the cause would spread very rapidly. Love is the standard which must govern the conduct of one believer towards another. The administrative order does not change this, but unfortunately sometimes the friends confuse the two and try to be a whole spiritual assembly to each other with the discipline and justice and impartiality that body must show, instead of being forgiving, loving, and patient to each other as individuals. Dear friends, a further principle which protects the institutions of the faith from yet another evil deeply rooted within the fabric of present day society is embodied in the commandment of Abdul Baha forbidding the believers to object to or censure, whether in or out of the meeting, the decisions of the spiritual assembly. In a world afflicted by much trouble and unrest, where men and women from all walks of life, individually and collectively, raise their voices in protest against the actions of the authorities, whether religious or political, and at times resort to violence in order to force their views on these authorities. The followers of Baha'u'llah are not influenced by the vain disputes, the transient passions, the controversies, and the entanglements which surround them within the old order, for they are so filled with the spirit of the faith of Baha'u'llah that they obey this commandment of Abdul Baha's with the utmost sincerity. A true Baha'i, therefore, will not criticize or censure the decisions of the spiritual assembly in word or attitude. A member of the spiritual assembly who does not wholeheartedly accept the majority decision of his assembly is indeed breaking a spiritual commandment of the cause of God. At the same time, the individual is not deprived of the right to air his views through proper channels, and if dissatisfied, to appeal against the decision of the assembly. He is given ample opportunity to raise any matter with the spiritual assembly, either personally or in consultation with the community at the 19th-day feast. He has the right of appeal to the National Spiritual Assembly against the decision of the local assembly, or to the Universal House of Justice against that of the National Spiritual Assembly. But in the meantime, he will continue to accept the decision of the assembly until the result of the appeal is made known. To challenge the authority of the assembly at any time or for any reason is to break yet another spiritual principle firmly established in the cause of God. Service on the spiritual assembly is a great bounty which His Holiness Baha'u'llah has bestowed on his loved ones. It confers upon the individual member not only the unique privilege of taking part in the erection of the framework of his world order, but also enables him to improve his character and to acquire spiritual qualities through the spiritual battles he must fight in order to subdue his self and passion during the periods of high consultation. Dear friends, let us once more refer to the analogy of the channel with 9 bricks. As a result of the water flowing through, the bricks inside the channel will, after some time, lose their roughness and sharp edges. Similarly, the individual's shortcomings and weaknesses will come to the surface at the Assembly's meetings and will take their stand against the onrushing forces of the spirit of the cause flowing through. By this interaction, man's ignorance, prejudice, and other human failings will gradually be diminished and will be replaced by a greater measure of maturity and wisdom. Membership of the spiritual assembly carries with it great responsibilities too. A major responsibility which falls on the shoulders of the assembly members is to ensure that the affairs of the assembly are conducted in accordance with the spiritual and administrative principles laid down by the central figures of the faith, and not after the pattern of man made theories borrowed from the outside world. The administrative order of Baha'u'llah consists of 2 parts: the form and the spirit. The relationship of the two is like that of the body and the soul. Although the essential part is the soul, it does not mean that the body should be neglected. It is important to preserve the balance between the two. An essential aspect of the form of the administrative order, which it is necessary for the spiritual assemblies to develop in their own ways, is a system of administration based on efficiency and order. But administrative procedures and systems should only be considered as a means to an end, and not the ultimate purpose, which is the flow of the spirit of the cause through the embryonic institutions of Baha'u'llah's world order. It is the responsibility of each member of the assembly to guard against attempting to perfect the administrative machinery at the risk of losing the spirit, and so creating a situation in which the assembly, over a period of time, may be molded into a rigid form, efficient in administration but enslaved by rules and regulations, highly organized yet devoid of the spirit of love and cooperation, which are the distinguishing features of the New World Order. As the administrative order of Baha'u'llah unfolds itself, some of its unique features are gradually being revealed, and the pattern of the development of its institutions is becoming more evident with the passage of time. One such feature is the manner in which the healthy functioning of spiritual assemblies, both local and national, are to be safeguarded. This responsibility falls not only on the members of the local and national assemblies, but also on an institution which plays an important role in and constitutes a vital part of the administrative order, namely the institution of the hands of the cause of God. This institution and the boards of counselors, this latter perpetuating into the future 2 of the functions of the hands of the cause, the protection and propagation of the faith, have come into being by means of appointment and not by election. Power and authority are invested solely in the local and national spiritual assemblies, and the direction of the affairs of the cause in their respective areas is entrusted to them. The counselors are not administrators, and their function is not therefore to administer the affairs of the faith, but rather through their counsels and advice to the national assemblies, through the loving care and assistance which they, together with their board members, extend to the local assemblies, and by inspiring the believers and encouraging them in the discharge of their administrative duties, this body plays a major role in the protection of the faith and the healthy functioning of the institutions of Baha'u'llah's embryonic world order. In the last analysis, however, the vigor and vitality of an assembly devolves upon its members, for it is through their sincerity and devotion to the faith that all the high ideals and principles laid down by the blessed beauty and the center of his covenant are applied to the work of the spiritual assembly. A deeper study of the writings of the beloved guardian Shola Effendi on Baha'i administration will enable the individual to realize that the aim of the members of the assembly in this period of the formative age of the faith should not primarily be directed towards becoming efficient administrators or specialists in solving the community's various complex problems, but rather towards creating a spiritual atmosphere during the course of their meetings, so that the confirmations of Baha'u'llah may reach them from every direction, and that through his assistance they may be able to resolve their problems. The way in which this can be achieved, as already stated, is through the firmness of one's faith in Baha'u'llah and loyalty to his covenant, through the suppression of the ego, and through purity of motive, humility, and lowliness amongst his loved ones, and servitude to his exalted threshold. This is the challenge that faces the trust ones of the merciful in this age.